Hey, how's it going? Seth here from REtipster.com. In this video, I'm going to give you a tour of a online service called MapRight. And I wanted to show you how it might be useful to you. So just speaking for myself, I'm a land investor. So there's a lot of different research and marketing tools integrated with MapRight that are pretty useful for what I do. But there's a lot of different industries that use this kind of software because it basically takes a ton of different sources of information and brings it all into one place and makes it pretty easy and seamless and kind of nice to use. So I'm going to get into my account and show you how it works. Just to get started, what I'm going to do is go and create a new map. For my purposes, it's for real estate. And the first thing you see here is a map of the entire United States, and you have to pick what state you want to go and start working in. So in this particular example, I'm just going to pick New Mexico. Once we get into the site, it looks like this. And one thing about MapRight that you're going to notice right off the bat is that this is entirely web-based. So you're doing all of this stuff from your web browser. This is not something that you use in conjunction with Google Earth. This is not like a plugin or a KMZ file that you're dropping in Google Earth and working with that way. All this stuff is handled on the MapRight website. Just to get started here, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. Let's go over here to Albuquerque. And I'm going to show you how this works. So over here on the left, you're going to see this sidebar, and right up at the very top is views. There's a lot of different views you can use here. Google is probably the one that most people will start with, but there's also MB satellite, and this is actually a different type of map called Mapbox, and you'll notice that little logo down here in the lower left corner of the map. You can also do infrared, and for somebody like myself, this isn't that useful, but say if you were in the forestry profession, what this does is all of the green areas on the map, basically indicating where a lot of vegetation is, that's going to turn red. So it's going to basically show you where a lot of the trees and vegetation are. And in a place like New Mexico, this could be somewhat useful just because so much of it is desert. And it's going to just point out pretty clearly, hey, this is where the vegetation is. And these green spots over here, that's where the non-vegetation areas are, or sandy desert. This next thing over here, vintage topo and then modern topo. So these are basically the same thing. They're just nationwide topographic map. One of them is older and one of them is newer. And I think the newer one, maybe it's a little bit easier to read or easier on the eyes or something. I don't know. But it basically just shows you the terrain of the land and like the different elevations. If you zoom in here, you can sort of see where those lines are. And one important thing to note about this is that this is not like 100% accurate. This is not meant to replace a topographical survey where a person actually goes out to a property and literally measures it down to the centimeter, what the elevations are. That's not what this is, but just as a first glance, this can give you an idea for what the topography looks like. And then moving on here, there is Street View. And that's basically the same general idea as like a Google map where you can see all the different street names. And then Hex 30 and Hex 15 are pretty much the same general thing. It's just that Hex 15 is a much higher resolution satellite image. So when you zoom way in on the Earth with Hex 15, you're going to see a lot more detail than you will with Hex 30. If we go and switch to that, you can kind of see the difference just in terms of the resolution. So anyway, that's what those views are. Now moving on. So this is where I think it gets really interesting, are these different layers. So the first layer over here is Parcels. And if we go ahead and turn this on, you're going to see it does pretty much the same thing that any data service does that provides parcel ownership data and parcel lines and that kind of thing. So it just shows the owner name over every single parcel. This is useful for obviously seeing who owns a parcel and also like who the neighbors are, that kind of thing. When you click on any of these things, it's going to pop out a little sidebar over here and show you some basic details on that. And say if you wanted to create like some kind of a property profile or just an image that has a certain parcel's lines outlined in red, you can do that by going over here and setting the map boundaries, or you can even set the boundaries over multiple parcels, which is what I just did here. If we go ahead and click this, and then click this one here. And the reason I'm doing this is just if there was ever a situation where, say you had multiple parcels that you were trying to sell together, and you wanted to outline all of them, you can do it that way. Then we go down here and click Merge Parcels and Set Map Boundaries. and save it like this. And now you can see all of them are outlined like this. Or likewise, if we just wanted to do this to one of them, we could do it that way as well, if we just didn't do the merge feature. So once you figured out which parcel you're looking at, you're probably going to want to turn this off, because literally everything you click on is going to pop out this little thing. I don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the parcel layer. Now, if we go down to the next layer, which is called TRS, that stands for Township Range and Section. We click on that and then zoom out a little bit. We can see all of the township section and ranges mapped out like this, and it tells us which one we're looking at. So this is pretty important when it comes to legal descriptions. This is a big part of what a surveyor uses to find and map out a property based on the legal description. And it's actually kind of confusing for the typical person to try to make sense of what a legal description is saying. And we do have a pretty decent article about this on REtipster.com that explains a lot of this. This was put together by EB Farmer. So I'm going to go ahead and link to that beneath this video as well if you want to check that out. If you are a surveyor, or if you just want to know, hey, which township section and range is my property in, it will show you really clearly right here if you just turn on this layer. And then likewise, there's also one for the city limits. Say if you don't really care about the township range or section, but you do want to know where the city limits are, it'll show you that really clearly for any cities. And townships are basically just those squares that I showed you just a second ago, which also consist of sections and ranges within them. But a city boundary line can be all over the place, and they usually don't look like a square. So if you just want to see the city limits, you can see that really easily by turning on this layer. And as you can see here, this is showing us the city limits of Albuquerque and possibly some other outlying areas here. If we go ahead and move around to other parts of the state, now we can see other cities and what those city limits are. So if you ever have a property where you're not entirely sure if it falls inside the city limits of a particular city, and this actually happens a lot, and it does matter because this can determine which jurisdiction has the say over like zoning issues or planning issues, or if you need to get permission about something. If you know where your property is located, whether it's in a township or a city, then you know who to go talk to and you know who has the authority over that. So this kind of map will just make that very, very clear. And also there is the county lines as well. And this kind of thing you can see pretty easily in Google Earth. So this isn't like that novel of a thing. But since you have access to everything else here, the county lines are in there too. You can see that pretty clearly right here as we kind of move along. And next up here is opportunity zones. And opportunity zones, this is not really something that I do a whole lot with, but I know for some real estate investors, this can be an important thing because sometimes there are certain tax advantages if you do invest within a certain opportunity zone. Just so you know, if you're not sure whether or not a property falls inside an opportunity zone, this will spell it out pretty clearly for you. And then moving on down, if we turn that off and turn on these school districts can be another important thing for a property owner or real estate investor to be aware of, because it can have an impact on property values. It can also have an impact on how easy it is to sell a property if a property is in a great school district. So this has a map layer for that as well. That just shows you really clearly, these are the school districts that cover these areas. If we turn that off, and water features, so this is pretty interesting. So this basically shows you all the bodies of water. And we can zoom in here. This is New Mexico, so there's not a whole lot of bodies of water, but you can see where they all are, just so they jump out to you and they're pretty obvious to see. And then if we go down further and turn on the wetlands filter, so this shows us where the wetlands are. And obviously, if it's right in the middle of a body of water, that's going to be considered a wetland. And wetlands are not really a huge thing over on the western part of the U.S., but they are a huge thing over on the eastern side of the U.S. in states like Florida and Michigan, and really a lot of states along the East Coast. So I'm going to quick go and move over to one of those states and show you some better examples of how this can work. Let's go ahead and zoom in here. You can just sort of see the map coming alive with a lot of these blue spots sticking out where the water is. And let's go find a good example here. So I'm actually going to uncheck some of these things just so we can see more clearly where each one of these features will stand out to us. So let's start by turning on the FEMA Panels and LOMRs. And just so you know, basically what this is this is FEMA's version of creating like townships. That's what these little red boxes are that you're seeing all over the place. So I'm going to turn that off. FEMA Floodplain. So this is just showing us where the floodplains are near all the bodies of water. You can click on these things and it'll show you what type of floodplain it is. So you know, like, is this a really, really bad floodplain that's going to flood constantly? Or is this a 100-year floodplain or a 500-year floodplain? If you know anything about the different classifications of floodplains, that will make sense to you. As you sort of scroll around here, you can see all those floodplains sticking out. Obviously, if it's in the middle of a lake, that's going to be considered a floodplain, but it's also going to expand beyond the lake as well, just so you can see, hey, this place might actually be in danger of that lake flooding. And as you can see in this particular example, we've got a floodplain where part of it is the 100-year floodplain, and then part of it is the 500-year floodplain. So it actually differentiates that pretty clearly. Now, another interesting thing about this FEMA floodplain map is sometimes when you select this, you'll just see this, where like there's nothing included here. They don't have any data, which is actually kind of strange because I know there are flood maps for this particular area, but for whatever reason, MapRight doesn't have it. So occasionally you'll come across this kind of thing. Just be aware of that. If we move on here to wetlands, this wetlands map is basically just going to use the wetlands mapper from the National Fish and Wildlife Government Agency, whatever that's called, which is actually available for free if you want it. It's just not nearly as nice and user-friendly as this is. And also another notable thing about that map is that it's not really that accurate. I think it will give you some good red flags to watch out for, but it's not like you can look at that as the gospel truth. Just looking at this map right here, I know for a fact this right here and this right here are not wetland areas, and neither is this up here. Actually, a lot of this stuff isn't. However, these areas down here definitely are wetlands. So it's not like you want to bet a whole lot of money on this, but if you just need a first glance and you don't want to spend a whole lot of time or money actually investigating on site, this is worth at least looking at. MapRight makes this particular layer pretty easy to see and understand. Just be aware, you don't want to like bet your life on it because it might not be 100% accurate. And then water features here. So this just shows you where all of the lakes are and that kind of thing. And it's actually kind of interesting how it's not highlighting this river right here, which I don't entirely understand, but just another example of how this isn't perfect. It's just going to give you some pretty good clues to go by most of the time. So go ahead and deselect that. Now, public lands, this basically just shows you any federal or state land or conservation easements. So if we zoom out here, we can kind of go over here and we can see these areas. And if we click on them, it shows us what they are. This is the Cannonsburg State Game Area. So this is kind of useful to know if you have a property that's right next to federal or state land, or if it's near that. Sometimes that's a nice feature just to make people aware of. Just kind of shows that pretty quick and easy. Railroads, this is just going to show you where any and all railroads are. You can kind of see there's one right over here. So if you ever have any doubt about that, say if you have a property where there's a railroad going over it or near it, this can just kind of make it really obvious where those railroads are. Contour lines. So this is going to show you kind of a similar thing to what the topo maps will, but it's a little bit of a different view of it. And you can kind of zoom in, just get an idea for what the terrain of the property looks like. Again, this is not the same thing as getting a topographical survey, similar to the wetlands map and the water features map. Like, it's not guaranteed to be totally accurate, but just kind of give you an idea. This is in Michigan right here, so it's a pretty flat area. If we were to go back to New Mexico, it would probably look a lot more interesting. Let's go check that out quick. All right, so here's New Mexico. You can kind of see it just shows you where a lot of those changes in elevation are as you kind of scroll throughout here. And then the soil map. So again, this is yet another thing that you can get for free elsewhere, but MapRight just pulls it all into one place and makes it a little bit easier to read. The soil map is just telling you approximately what soil types you can expect throughout the entire country. And all you have to do is click on this and it will show you what type of soil is there. And I don't actually know how accurate this is either. I don't know if somebody literally went through every square foot of the entire US and like took soil borings to verify this. So I don't know how much confidence you can really have in this, but I think it's probably most likely accurate. Just again, don't bet a whole lot of money on this, because if the soil types really truly do matter, you're probably going to want to test that. And why would the soil type matter? Well, there's actually a lot of different reasons why it might be important to know about. One can be like load bearing capacity, like how big of a building or how heavy of a building could you put on this soil. Can have a lot of implications about like septic permits and Perc tests and whether or not the water will drain through the soil fast enough, things like that. Again, to be 100% sure about it, you have to actually get a Perc test and have somebody go to the property and do this stuff. But just getting a educated guess through this kind of a soil map can be a helpful first step before you go much further and actually start spending time and money doing those kinds of assessments. And then going further down here, when it says features, what this means is, say if I have a property that I own and I'm trying to sell, or maybe I want to develop it and I'm trying to pitch the idea to some investors or anything like that, where you want to portray what could possibly be on a property. What this allows you to do is kind of map things out on the property itself. For example, let's say I wanted to put my house right here. And I just wanted to say, hey, just so you know, this is where my house is going to go. And then I wanted to put a horse stall over here to the side. I can sort of put that right there. Say if I actually got some on-site photos and I wanted to add them to this map so that it's interactive, and either I or other people I share this map with can click on it and see those photos. I can add that here and then click on this and click on this and then upload my own images to the map. I could do the same thing with a panoramic view. I could put that right here. I could add all kinds of other stuff if I wanted to. And just to give an example of what this can look like if you actually utilize it to its full potential. So this is an example from MapRight that they use in their demos that they shared with me. And you can see here, this is a photo point, and you can click on this and go over here and see actual photos that somebody uploaded here. So that's an example of what that can look like. Likewise, you can see the boundary lines that they drew around here. We can go over here and click on photo and video. You can see a little video that the person added here. You can see other images of the main house and where it is. We can see 360-degree photos. So what this is you can actually integrate Matterport with this. Matterport is this whole other virtual reality imaging service you can use. So you can actually like walk through the house itself. It's a totally different thing, but if you do have that, you can integrate that right here into MapRight if you want to do that kind of thing. And once you've created a map like this with all these little interactive hotspots on it, you can share this link with somebody else so they can go see it and click on these things themselves. Or you could embed this on your website or print it off as a PDF and send it to other people. So that's one of the useful features of MapRight. And a lot of that stuff is controlled over here in this features section of the sidebar. Some other interesting features here. So MapRight does allow you to see the 3D view of the property if you want, which is somewhat similar to Google Earth. Same general concept, how you can kind of scroll around and see things that way. You can also see the coordinates of wherever you're at right down here in the lower corner. And I'm really hardly even scratching the surface here in this overview. Actually, one other really important thing I do want to show you is that you can search for properties by the address, the Township Range and Section, that's what TRS stands for, or the parcel once you have the parcel ID or the owner name or the owner address. So if you click on that, let's do the ID here. So you would have to have the county and the APN. And this is already assuming that we're in New Mexico. So it's already making that assumption here. And this is actually a big deal because there's another software that I've used for a long time called Parlay 2.0. And Parlay is actually kind of a similar thing in some ways to MapRight. It's a plugin that works with Google Earth that will show you a lot of these parcel lines. And you can click on this stuff and see owner information. So it has a lot of similarities, but one thing you can't do in Parlay is search for properties like you can in MapRight. So I really appreciate that MapRight allows you to do that. With Parlay, you basically have to already know where the property is and zoom in on it, and then you can see the parcel lines. And I think something that Parlay can do that MapRight can't do is, first of all, work with Google Earth, which again, I just kind of like a little bit better. You can also draw these little 3D polygon things over parcels themselves and then remove the parcel lines and then see that polygon all by itself. By the way, I have another video explaining exactly how you can do this. It's really easy in Google Earth, but I don't believe you can do this in MapRight. So if you wanted this kind of thing, then Parlay is probably going to be a better fit for you. But really, Parlay and MapRight, even though there is some overlap between what they can both do, they do a lot of things just pretty fundamentally differently, and I think people use each of them for different reasons. So, I mean, honestly, like, if you can afford it, I would suggest having both on hand, and that's what I've got right now. But if I could only have one and not the other, I feel like MapRight has a whole lot more stuff you can do with it. But one of my big hangups, as I've kind of mentioned this several times already, is that most of this stuff is not going to give you 100% accuracy. So it's not like I can know for a fact this is all true. It's just like probably true, and I have to like double check it anyway. However, it does make things way more convenient, and even though a lot of this stuff is available for free in other places, all those free platforms are pretty hard and clunky to use. And I feel like MapRight does a really good job of just putting it all in one place and making it a lot more intuitive and user-friendly and easy to understand. And also, I didn't even mention this, MapRight does have 2 different mobile apps that I find pretty darn useful. It can actually help you tell when you're standing on a property versus not by using the location of where your phone is at, kind of like a GPS thing. You can also use it to look at wetlands and floodplains and a lot of the stuff I just showed you here from your phone instead of being on a computer. And Parlay is from a company called ReportAll, which also has a mobile app called LandGlide. I actually haven't used LandGlide a lot, but I know it's kind of a similar general concept. But in my experience using the MapRight apps, I found them pretty useful and pretty well put together. And in terms of the pricing, MapRight is definitely more expensive than Parlay is. Parlay is about $300 per year just to have this parcel line thing overlaid over the entire US, which is pretty useful, and in my opinion, it's worth the price. Whereas MapRight, depending on how much data you need and how many states you need it in, it can get significantly more expensive here. Like, I think for most people, if they wanted access to the entire US and if they didn't want limits on how many maps they can create, they could plan on spending closer to $1,000 a year for that. But it is possible to do cheaper depending on how many limitations you're willing to work with. If you're interested in checking out MapRight, I'm going to have a link to the website below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time.